Kim, I don't know that I've ever seen Martin Truex Jr. with a bigger smile, a smile of relief when he got out of the car at Bristol. I don't think he could have imagined he would have a 19th place finish and still survive.
Yeah, and, if other drivers hadn't had troubles, we might not be talking about Martin Truex Jr. moving on.
Yeah, I mean, pretty amazing. Pete, when you look at Martin Truex Jr. and think about what he was able to do and survive at Bristol, now that he has dodged that first bullet in the first round of the playoffs, do you think he now becomes a championship contender once again?
Well, you certainly can't rule him out, but look at this next round that's coming up. I mean, Texas this week, Talladega, we all know that can happen to anybody there. And then who knows about the variables at the Roval. So at this point, I don't have a clear-cut favorite for anybody, but for Martin, to Kim's point, had things not happened to some other people, maybe we wouldn't even be talking about him going into the round of 12, Brett.
Yeah, and they haven't shown me in the first round that they're capable of a championship. In the regular season, I was like, oh, Martin's definitely going to be a threat. This is maybe the season where we see him get another championship. But since the playoffs started, I don't think I've seen the team that I saw in the regular season. And you look at even Darlington, he had that issue in practice that he felt like he didn't diagnose. And you think about the veteran driver he is, to have something like that slip just makes me scratch my head. And then, Kansas, I know they had a little bit of bad luck, but again, they haven't shown me the team I saw in the regular season, and they wouldn't be moving on if they weren't the regular season champs. So I think on that note, this style of playoffs where we have a regular season champ that gets 15 extra bonus points, it's really showing the value of that, because he wouldn't have moved on if he hadn't got those 15 bonus points.
Well, I know, Pete, you guys had Joey Logano on this week for his semi-regular visit to the Joey behind the wheel, and he talked about the fact that as a defending champ, how frustrating it was that he's out at the end of the first round, but he was very frank and said, hey, look, we just didn't have the speed. We haven't had the speed in weeks, and I think he was just kind of hoping he would survive the first round and hit some tracks where speed wasn't necessarily that important.
Yeah, you're right. When you think about Kansas, the middle race of this round, they wound up with a 5th place finish there, but that was all because of circumstances of a late caution and pit strategy from Paul Wolfe. But, they had no speed at all. And that was the story we had from that team pretty much all year. Where's the speed? We need to find speed. And Joey had said a couple of times, if we can just survive and advance and get to the next round, maybe we can find that speed. But guys, if you are in the middle of trying to win a championship and you're also trying to diagnose why you're not fast enough like everybody else is, that's a difficult needle to thread. I didn't have them out in the first round, but I really didn't have Joey going much further than the round of 12. But that was eye-opening, and they've got 7 races now to kind of go to work on 2024 for the defending Cup Series champ.
Kim?
Yeah, I'll echo Pete's sentiments. I can't count the number of times I've had the 22 in my pit section this season, and every single time that I talk with Paul, it's, oh, we don't have the outright speed that we want. They were just behind the 8 ball, and it was very apparent. Now, they are a team that can execute even when they aren't fast, and I don't know that we saw perfect execution from them, but I think some people, fan-wise, might be surprised that they didn't make it into the next round, but the inside baseball, if you were in the garage each weekend and talking with the team, I don't think it's as big of a surprise as some may think.
Well, and that kind of brings me to the question about the Fords in general, Pete. I mean, you think about, the Penske cars. You got 1 car left in the playoffs right now. And Ryan Blaney, he's the one left in there for Penske. Stuart Haas has no cars left in the playoffs. Kevin Harvick got, and that was just a horrible, horrible performance by Kevin Harvick, and even Rodney Childers very upset. Just said we brought the same setup back that we had a winning car with a year ago, and we ended up 5 laps down. But the enigma in this whole thing is, what has Roush Fenway Keselowski figured out that none of the other Ford teams have figured out?
That's why I can't take a broad brush and say, well, it's a Ford issue, because there are 2 Fords that are in the next round. There's one of those guys that won 3 of 5 races down the stretch of the end of the regular season. That makes it even more perplexing when you talk about Stewart-Haas Racing and Kevin Harvick. I never thought I would see Kevin Harvick 5 laps down anywhere, let alone Bristol Motor Speedway. We're talking about Joey Logano being out. You talk about Ryan Blaney still being in it, Brett. I mean, no offense. He's on the side of a milk carton. He's been missing in action for a lot of the time. He's just there. That's why it's so confusing to me to say that, well, whatever they're doing at Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing, I know the other 4 teams would love to have that secret sauce, because they've got it. And the other two big teams there, Team Penske and Stewart-Haas Racing, just do not. And they have not for most of the season.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, and this last half of the season, they have clearly become the banner carriers for Ford.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. You look at Chris Buescher, 3 wins. There's, Brad Keselowski's performances, although he doesn't have a win, he's right there knocking on the door of a win. But it's kind of shocking for you to say no SHR cars in the playoffs anymore. I know Kevin Harvick got knocked out, and to hear you say it out loud, though, is really like, wow. But, to everyone's point, Rodney left Bristol scratching his head. And then you can look at Darlington and the call when, Kevin was, committing to pit road, that whole situation. Maybe if that had gone a different direction, maybe we wouldn't be talking about Kevin Harvick, out of the playoff picture, but hindsight's 2020. I don't know that I saw a committed Kevin Harvick, though. We know it's his last season, and that's not to say, he hasn't had stellar performances in some of his races, but I get the sense that he's just ready for this season to be over. And that was before they were knocked out of the playoffs. I felt like I was seeing glimpses of that before. And so you have to wonder, does that factor into what we saw on track from Kevin? We know he's a fierce competitor, but to be honest, I don't know that I saw that fierceness from him like I've seen in other seasons. And for me, it seems like it's been just a countdown. When is the end of the season coming? When am I going into the TV booth?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know that I've felt the same thing, but it's interesting that you felt that. And Pete, to your point earlier, I actually picked Kevin Harvick in the race this past weekend at Bristol because he has been so good at Bristol, and I said, hey, it's going to be the Cinderella story. Kevin Harvick's going to win his last race at Bristol. He's going to move on to the next round of the playoffs. And Doug Rice said, is that sentiment? Is that your heart or is that your head? And I said, as good as he is here, that's my head. But boy, was I way wrong. As wrong as Rodney and the rest of them were, apparently.
That's the thing. I was going to say, Brett, it's the ultimate heart versus head. I mean, we have said this all year long. I mean, I would love to have been able to talk to everybody about Kevin Harvick dropping the mic at the end of the year with at least a win, getting to the championship 4. But to Kim's point, to me, it does feel like around, I don't know, maybe July or August, they were pretty much kind of like, well, this is all we've got. I know they're not giving up. Rodney Childers would never give up. But I felt like it was sort of the same thing that Kim felt. They kind of knew what their fate was going to be, and they were going to do the best that they possibly could. It was very eye-opening at Darlington because that's where I thought, well, wait a minute. This is the 4 team we've been waiting for. And unfortunately for them, they had the problem on pit road there and all that, and it took them out of the equation. But at the end of the day, he's got 7 races to go, kind of like what I just said about Logano. Can he play spoiler? Can he be the fly in the ointment? Again, I would love to be able to say that I see that, but I really haven't seen any reason to think why the 4 car is going to be a force in these final 7 because they've not been a force for much of 2023 in whole.
We mentioned Rosschwin and Keselowski. Both of their cars move on. The other team that has both of their cars moving on is 2311. And boy, Bubba Wallace was so excited at the end of that race. They hadn't been updating him a lot on what his point situation was, but he had, I think after the second stage, they basically said, you kind of stay where you are right now and you're in good shape. But he was so excited that he got to move on. He survived. And, Tyler Reddick has shown some flashes. And, hey, with the tracks coming up, especially Talladega, who knows what Bubba could accomplish?
Yeah, who knows what Bubba can accomplish? Or you look at Texas, what can Tyler do there this weekend? But I'm so thrilled for that team. And, even though Bubba, I'll say, kind of squeezed in points-wise, the effort that he just put into, especially Bristol, was unmatched from anything I feel like I've seen from Bubba before. And I think, throughout this season, there have been races where I've said that too, is Bubba, to me, has started to evolve to the driver I think, his fans want him to be. He seems, from a mental perspective, to have more mental stability than we've seen ever before. He seems like he can find a good headspace more easily than he has in the past. And then I think his racecraft, like managing races and his evolution on the track, I think has come a long way too. You just look at some of the races throughout this season where he hadn't performed before and he knew it was imperative, like Watkins Glen, he's never been on good on road courses, and he fought through that race. Bristol, he knew, their goal was to finish fifth and fifth in stage 1, 5th in stage 2, and 5th in the race. While they didn't do that, they still qualified very well to get him track position to start, and then scored 8 points in the first stage to really bank those points. And that inevitably was what helped him move on. But yeah, who knows what they can do in this round. I think, not a lot of people had Bubba in the playoffs period. So I think he's shocking a lot of people, the fact that he's moved on to the next round.
Well, and he's shown some maturity. I know that late in the race, I can't remember. I want to say it was Truex, but I can't remember who it was. Somebody had fresher tires and kind of came up and was racing Bubba, and Bubba got a little ticked off at the way he passed him. And Bubba wanted to go up and started to go up and kind of give him a little bump, and they came on the radio and said, let him go. Just don't get into anything right now. You're okay. So, and he did. He kind of backed off and let it go, Pete.
He did. And Ken, you said the right phrase there, headspace. I mean, he is compartmentalizing a lot of things now that he's had trouble doing in the past. There's been no question I've ever had about Bubba's talent behind the wheel of a race truck or a race car. And the ones that 2311 are giving him, I think he and Booty Barker are a great tandem, but we all know that sometimes the emotions get the best of him. We've not seen him. And that's where I've been really impressed with how he's handled this. He does take each situation and maybe takes a step back where in the past he wouldn't have done that. And I think that's been really impressive. So when you combine he and Tyler Reddick, congratulations to Steve Loletta, Michael Jordan, Denny Hamlin, everybody with that team to have both cars now, not just in the playoffs, but in the round of 12. And I'll even take a bigger picture, guys, and just talk about Toyota in general. You've got 5 of the 6 Toyotas in the playoffs with the 3 from Joe Gibbs Racing. And oh, by the way, the one that's not, that was Ty Gibbs, who had a career best finish of 5th and led a lot of laps on Saturday night. So the whole Toyota camp in 2311 in particular here in our conversation has been really impressive here in the playoffs.